Episode 1 of Berserk of Gluttony begins with an entity fighting hundreds of goblins and slashing through them with his sword under the moonlight. The goblins chase a man as he travels in a carriage towards the kingdom. Just then, the warriors show up and defend him from the goblins by killing them. Later that day, Fate stands guard at the Valeric house as he envies the warriors happily passing by as they talk about goblin subjugation. He regrets never being able to be successful due to his gluttony and holds his stomach, which growls in hunger. In the evening, the holy knights walk into the city and a man accidentally drops a fruit near Hado's foot. Hado and Memo begin to bully the man and beat him up while claiming he can be beheaded for disrespecting a holy knight. Later, the holy knights arrive home at the house of Valeric and toss Fate's daily wages on the floor, demanding he pick it up. They stomp on his hands as he picks up the coins. They mock him and beat him up while he curses himself and his skill of gluttony. Just then, they are interrupted by Lady Roxy, who stops them, claiming their behavior isn't holy knight worthy and that they should treat him better. She also helps him get up once they leave and offers him words of encouragement while whipping his bleeding eye. She offers to swap shifts and tells him to report it to her if they do that again. Fate heads over to the store to eat some bread. The shopkeeper sees him beaten up once again and tells him not to suffer the same fate as his predecessors. All along he cannot stop thinking about Valeric's cruelty, Lady Roxy's kindness, and his own incapabilities. Just then, he sees a few bandits running in the distance, and rushes to alert Lady Roxy about it. She leaves him in charge of the standing guard and rushes to finish the bandits. He watches her vanish into the darkness to the sounds of clashing swords. Just as she disappears, a bandit rushes out towards him. He is perplexed about whether he should run but decides to stay and fight because Lady Roxy trusted him with the spot. He uses the tip of the flagpole to stab through the chest of the bandit and kill him. Just then, a voice claims that his gluttony skill has been activated and appraisal and mind reading have been added to his skills. Lady Roxy returns to check up on Fate. And he is able to hear her thoughts. She thanks him and offers him an opportunity to work at the House of Heart, and he accepts the offer. Later that night, he wonders what his powers mean. The next day, he decides to take his 2 silver coins to purchase a sword but is told that for 2 silver, he can only select from the scrap swords. He inspects them and utilizes his appraisal abilities. He comes across a sword that speaks to him. The sword introduces itself as Greed and claims they are similar, convincing him to buy it. The Veilrics discuss Fate leaving them to work for the House of Heart. Memel expresses her hate, saying they should teach Lady Roxy a lesson, but Raphael claims there are plenty of replacements for him, and they shouldn't butcher their relations. Memel also questions him about his research, and he claims to be researching to obtain an immortal body. Fate wanders with his sword out in the wilderness. Just then a goblin attempts to attack him, but he uses his sword to slash through and kill the goblin. Fate's gluttony skill is activated and he has an increase in stats and a boost in strength. Fate turns over to see many more hefty and armed goblins. The sword laughs, telling him that each one is 100 goblins. They charge at Fate, but he tactfully takes them down and has multiple gluttony skill activation. The sword brings it to his notice that he isn't hungry as he reflects on his skill increase. The sword explains that the gluttony skills devour status in exchange for skills. That's why he doesn't gain experience, and he stays on level 1. The sword tells him they are the same kind and instructs him to keep anyone from finding out his powers, as gluttony is a skill that violates God's principles. The sword proclaims Fate as his master and pledges to fight by his side. The sword tells Fate to collect the goblin ears and exchange them for coins. Fate decides to use the coins to get a good meal, but the sword insists he spends them to bring him back into shape. Just then, Fate bumps into a man dragging a little girl along. The little girl asks him for help, and he follows them into a warehouse. He sees the man terrorize the little girl and threaten to sell her as a slave to the Holy Knights. Fate watches from hiding, infuriated, as he comes up with a plan to save her. Episode 2 of Berserk of Gluttony begins with the sister teaching kids about skills given by Lord Laplace. The kids find it very unfair that the Holy Knights possess highly valuable skills while some get weak skills. Just then, another sister arrives to inform her that Sahara hasn't been found anywhere around and heads towards the city. The scene switches to Sahara being tied up by the goon and crying. As the goon leaves, Fate undoes her shackles, only to notice the man has not left. The goon draws out his sword to fight, but Fate takes the little girl, runs in between the boxes, and hides. As the goon searches for them, Fate follows Greed's advice and pushes the boxes over him. He then slashes at the goon, cutting through his sword and chest. He then stabs him and questions him about who was behind this kidnapping. The goon reveals it is Hado Blaric. Fate takes the girl to get food. It is her first time eating meat, and she relishes the meal. Fate then takes her safely to the sisters. On the way back, Greed tells him about the new skill he has acquired. He realizes that Sharp Edge is incredibly strong, and could have resulted in his death against the goon. Greed reminds him the next day is his first day at work at the House of Heart, and that he should purchase new clothes. The scene switches to a scene at the bar where a man talks to the bartender about Lord Mason's demise and how Lady Roxy won't be able to prevent the tyranny of the Holy Knights. The next morning, Fate arrives at the House of Heart. And is amazed to see Lady Roxy in a dress. She takes him to her father's grave to introduce him. Fate learns that her father has just passed away 5 days ago, and is amazed by her compassion. She requests him to help her make the house a lively one again. Just then she goes to shake his hand, but he refrains as he doesn't want to be able to read her mind. A week passes and Fate is fairly acquainted with his colleagues and manages to fit in. They, however, wonder why he is hungry right after lunch break. Just then, Miss Haru arrives to call him to meet Milady. Lady Roxy calls him Faye, a nickname. He realizes it's the same nickname his dad gave him. She claims it is to lighten things in the house together, calling him family. Mid-conversation, Fate faints and only wakes up to find himself in his room with a note from Roxy asking him to take the next day off. He questions Greed about the changes in his body. Greed tells him that it is a change that comes with his skill and he will crave souls till the very end. If he doesn't kill, he will starve to death. Greed brings to Fate's notice that his eyes will turn red when he is at his limit. That night, Fate heads out to kill goblins and rid himself of starvation. He kills multiple goblins with his sword and heads to the hobgoblin nest to kill more fierce goblins. Just then, he hears the footsteps of a much larger goblin heading towards him. Greed tells him about the goblin's skill to heal wounds, saying it will pose a threat. Fate uses a sneak attack to slice off an arm of the goblin. The goblin begins to swing its arm around to attack Fate, but he is able to precisely attack and kill the giant. Fate earns the self-healing skill as well as stats. Greed tells him that he can use his stats to upgrade him, however, he would have to use all of them up. Fate agrees, as it is a partnership and both of them should level up together. Upgrading the sword allows him to use it as a bow which doesn't require arrows. He is able to shoot arrows out of thin air, and they follow the target to hit them. He practices his new abilities on the goblins around. Berserk of Gluttony Episode 3 begins with Fate stopping Roxy at the gate. Roxy tells him that it's her in disguise leaving on a secret inspection. Fate apologizes as he doesn't recognize her, and she invites him to accompany her on the journey. The two make their way to the city and Roxy requests him to call her Lexi for the day. Greed teases them, and Fate tells him to shut up. Unfortunately, Roxy thinks he is telling her to shut up and apologizes for being annoying. Fate assures that he wasn't saying it to her, and they proceed with the inspection. She requests to see his sword, but Fate fears she will know who he really is. She, however, doesn't find out. They proceed to the market and taste grapes. She accidentally claims they were grown in her own house, which makes the vendor suspicious. Fate, however, covers up for her. Just then, a holy knight arrives and hears Fate's stomach grumble. He goes on to intimidate Fate, but Roxy steps in between. The holy knight almost realizes she is a holy knight, but the two pretend to be a couple, and she scolds him for not eating the breakfast prepared by her and apologizes. She feels the thrill of linking arms with the boy, and Fate reads her mind and pulls back. They proceed to see a vendor selling lucky stones that could possibly have a gem inside. Fate uses his appraisal skill to look into an ore and find it to be a dud. Roxy, however, returns the stone, and they walk away. Roxy then goes on to inquire about an incident from bypasses discussing it, but they recommend she speak to a warrior. Fate takes her to the bar he used to dine at. They inquire from the owner an old ad and get to know that it is probably a monster who killed the goblins. Roxy gets harassed by a few warriors there, but she teaches them a lesson. They realize she is a holy knight and apologize. After leaving, they run into the Vleriks harassing a boy claiming he is under their protection. Roxy frees him from them, and they take the boy and feed him delicious food. Unfortunately, they aren't able to find the child's mother and offer to let him stay at her house for the night. Just then the mother approaches them, and they hand over the child. Fate is concerned Roxy might see him if she ventures out to fight the monster. The next day, Fate heads over to the market and buys a mask to conceal his identity. He also purchases an ore and gives her the one with the blue gem she likes. The last scene of Berserk of Gluttony Episode 3 changes to the Holy Knights having a meeting. Berserk of Gluttony Episode 4 begins with the warriors coming across Fate in disguise, standing triumphant over a pile of dead goblin bodies. They name him Corpse before running away. Back at the Heart House, Roxy approaches Fate, asking him to accompany her on a secret mission, and takes him to the Heart family vineyards. She introduces him to her mother, and her mother asks him if he likes her. Fate claims that he cares very dearly about Roxy, but this makes her shy, and she runs to her room. Returning to her room reminds Roxy about her father, who inspired her to become a holy knight. She then goes out with Fate to harvest grapes. A worker at the vineyard tells him about the seasonal harvest and monsters that come to attack it, explaining that Roxy comes to defend the vineyard against the kobolds. Later that evening, Fate sees a girl with red eyes and is also unable to use his appraisal skill on her. She claims to leave the kobolds to him. Just then, Roxy arrives and claims the girl is Galia. Fate confronts her about fighting the kobolds. She reassures him that she will be alright. The next morning, the workers find the vineyards to be destroyed. Roxy, Fate, and a few warriors trace their location and watch from the bushes. They see another stronger kobold, whose level is identified as 50. Fate feels deep hunger and realizes he should hurry up. Returning back to the workers, she promises to defeat the beast and fight it the next day as she makes preparations. The same night, Fate approaches the herd and decides to begin slaying it. He transforms Greed into a bow and begins taking out the lower-level kobolds. He then uses Greed to slash through more. Unfortunately, the beast grabs his arrows when shot at, rendering them useless. The beast unleashes a powerful punch, throwing Fate to the ground. Fate pretends to be dead and slashes the other kobold when it has its guard down. Greed informs Fate that he can use his first-level arts if he gives him 10% of his stats. This transforms Greed into a much more powerful weapon, blows through the punches of the kobold beast, and kills it, leaving a huge crater in the ground. Just then, Fate has a stroke after killing a creature of a much higher level than him. The next morning, the warriors arrive at the site to see the kobolds already dead and the huge crater created. Roxy informs her mother about it but points out the destruction done to the landscape. However, she is happy the monsters are taken care of. She suspects it is done by Galia. Before taking leave, Roxy's mother requests that he be by Roxy's side and support her till the end. Returning back to the capital, Fate goes on his hints but learns that goblins won't be sufficient anymore. Later that day, Fate overhears that Hato is joining the hunt for corpse. He also learns about the Gallian expedition. Roxy is assigned to the Gallian expedition. Fate requests that she not go, but she has her mind set on the mission. The Vlerics celebrate their opportunity to get rid of the Hart family. Berserk of Gluttony Episode 5 begins with Hato facing off against Fate. Hato deploys his warriors to attack Fate, but Fate defeats them with ease and the rest run away. Fate then faces Hato. Fate reveals his face and shocks Hato. Hato uses the Holy Sword attack, but Fate dodges it. Fate consults Greed before slicing Hato's sword. He confronts Hato about all the turmoil he brought to innocent people before slamming his face into multiple trees. Fate then uses his special attack to blow Hato to pieces. Leaving only his body. Fate questions him about Roxy's mission. Hato pleads that he will cancel the expedition if his life is spared. But Fate drives a sword through his chest and kills him.
今なら第二位階への道が開けるんだが。では行くぞ。これが俺様の第二位階。大釜だ。
Roxy prepares for her trip to Gallia and leaves, assuring them that she will meet them in 3 years.
みんなそんな顔しないで。3年なんてすぐです。フェイ。
ロキシー様。
また会いましょう、フェイト。
Fate also leaves the job at the House of Heart to become a warrior.
寂しくなるな。いつでも戻ってこいよ。
Haru gives him his pay for the days he worked as well as severance pay before he leaves.
ロキシー様を守る。
Roxy arrives to give a speech to the warriors, accompanying her to Gallia, and meets Miria and Mugan.
ロキシー様。ミリア。
お嬢ちゃんも志願組か。
頼りにしてますよ。
はい。
Raini conducts research on the monsters slain by the corpse.
リッチのムクロって最近武人の間で噂になってる魔物いるでしょ。
They realize they aren't normal arrow wounds,
ただの弓矢痕じゃないよね。
but instead wounds inflicted by magic arrows cast by the black sword. They contemplate the ability of the powers it holds.
見てみたいな。大罪武器。
On his journey, Fate arrives at Tetra City. He inquires about a ride to Gallia, but is informed to return the next day. He decides to do his research and have food during his wait.
とりあえず腹ごしらえと情報収集だな。
Entering a restaurant, he sees a man pleading with the warriors to help with their monster problems, but they end up bullying him.
助けて欲しけりゃ誠意を見せろ。
Fate teaches them a lesson and recognizes the man to be Set.
なんだって。
He recalls his moments in the village and how Set used to bully him. He also recalls Set's father kicking him out of the village after the death of his father. However, on Set's request, he agrees to help the village fight the monsters.
行くぞ。父さんとの思い出がある。
Arriving at the village, Fate is met with animosity from Set's father.
ゴミを連れて帰ってくるなんてどういうつもりだゼト。
His father suggests they'd rather sacrifice Set to the monsters and buy time for more warriors.
俺は目の前でフェイトが無事を倒すところを見た。
すまない。フェイト。さっきはすまなかった。いや。
Set, however, vouches for Fate and takes him home. Set claims to be a changed man after the birth of his daughter
この子のおかげさ。
and renounces his father's ideas. He tells Fate about the monsters, giving him an idea of how to fight them.
相変わらず腹すかしてんのか。ちょっと待ってろ。
Following that, Set's daughter plays with him and offers him candy.
これあげる。
ありがとう。
Later, when they sit for dinner, Fate abruptly faints.
フェイト、どうした？
Set questions him about eating anything suspicious. His daughter reveals that she offered him candy given to her by her grandfather.
お兄ちゃんに飴あげたよ。
飴？
Set is afraid his grandfather is serious about offering Fate as a sacrifice at the end of Berserk of Gluttony Episode 5.